Hello. I'm going to reflect on this saying of Jesus about taking up your cross. What does Jesus mean by this? First, I'll read the story, and it starts with a conflict between Jesus and Peter. Here it is. It's from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. Jesus began to teach his disciples that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Jesus said all this very openly. But Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But then Jesus, turning and looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus then called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." So let's think about this saying of Jesus about taking up your cross. But let's first of all start and think about this fight, this conflict between Jesus and Peter. What's got into Peter? Why is he so upset? Well, I think it's clear on a personal level. Peter's upset, of course, because his friend is telling him he's going to suffer and die. And of course, Peter doesn't want that for Jesus. But also on a theological level, for Peter, this is a bit of a scandal, a bit outrageous. It doesn't make sense in Peter's mind that the Messiah should suffer or die. This is not glorious. This is not what the Messiah is meant to do. In the time of Peter, the expectation would be that the Messiah would be a glorious person, probably a conquering, victorious military kind of person. Certainly not somebody that would suffer or die. So it's an affront to Peter's belief. And Jesus' reaction is quite extreme, isn't it? Get behind me, Satan. I don't think Jesus uses such strong language against another person ever. This is unique. Something about this really makes Jesus angry. Maybe it touches a raw nerve for Jesus, because I think it's a bit like a temptation, right? You know those stories about Jesus in the wilderness? This is kind of like one of those moments again where, in a sense, Jesus is being tempted to take a different path to the journey that he thinks is God's will. In a sense, Peter is trying to offer Jesus kind of a protective kind of path, a ring fencing Jesus from any kind of danger. But Jesus, in his mind, that's not his way, and it's not God's will for him. And it leads us to think, I think, of a few things about the Christian journey, about this taking up our cross. God's purposes may not be our purposes, particularly if our purposes are selfish. And the way of Christ, after all, is the way of giving, a way of loving others, regardless of the cost to oneself. And also, after all, life is not about grabbing stuff for oneself. It's not about ring-selfing oneself from any kind of danger or threat. That's not really life. Life is about service, about seeking our fulfillment, even if that fulfillment might come in the midst of challenge, and quite often it does, of course. So some things to reflect on then in this saying about taking up the cross. First of all, a difficult truth, but I think it's there that God doesn't promise us an easy life. We might like an easy life, although I'm not quite sure what that would look like. But God doesn't promise that. But what God does guarantee is that God will be with us in the midst of all the dangers and challenges and struggle in life. God will be there with us. There's a well-loved saying in the Old Testament from Isaiah Do not fear, I have redeemed you. When you pass through waters, I will be with you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames consume you. No doubt in life, there will be those waters, those waves, those floods that might threaten to overcome us. But the promise of God is that even though the waves, the waters will hit us, we will not be overcome. We will not be submerged. We will not be drowned. And likewise with the fires in life, there are many things that can burn and many things that threaten us and make us feel burnt out. But God's promise is that we will not be consumed. That's God's promise, and I think that's the nature of carrying the cross. Secondly, and a kind of negative comment to remind you and myself that taking up a cross is not about putting up with abuse or exploitation or being taken advantage of. I think this saying has been misused sometimes. Abuse and exploitation and taking advantage of another person is contrary, is against God's will, as the Bible and Jesus testify to. Doing those things is not about taking up a cross. On the contrary, it is about inflicting a cross on another person. And actually doing that makes one the enemy of Christ, not a disciple of Christ. I think it's worth remembering that. And also another thing to remember is that in Christian spirituality, we believe that in these crosses of life, the things that bring us challenge and difficulty perhaps, we're not alone in carrying in that burden, that Jesus carries it with us. It's a shared journey. And lastly, in some ways, I suppose this takes us to the heart of the paradox of the Christian faith. We believe that these crosses, in fact, will save us. So what do we mean by the cross? Well, I've talked about challenge. Well, it could be a psychological challenge. St. Paul in his writings talks about a thorn in his side. We're never quite sure what he means by that. Maybe it's some internal psychological challenge that St. Paul has. It might be something like that. It might be just something that we're carrying in life that is bringing us difficulty, even suffering, and something that just is unavoidable, a health issue or something else. It might be the sacrifice that comes with love, with caring for another person in distress. Or it might actually be the pursuit of the thing that brings us joy, the pursuit of the thing that makes us feel really fulfilled, that makes us who we truly are. And in pursuing and in attaining that call, it might involve sacrifice, loss, hardship, danger. That might be our cross too. I think the point is that in these challenges, these personal challenges, these crosses are actually the things that bring us fulfillment in life. They help us put life in a bigger perspective. For as I said earlier, life is not something to cling to. It's not something that we grab hold of. That's not living. Life is something to give away. And it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's true. The more we give in life, indeed, the more we do receive. And certainly, the more we die to oneself, especially one's ego, the more we truly find ourselves. I'm going to finish with the words of St. Francis. The prayer of St. Francis that has been put to song, "Make me a channel of your peace." It's a beautiful song, a beautiful prayer. And sometimes when we sing or say this prayer, we think, oh, what a nice song, what a nice prayer about peace. But the words are quite profound, very profound. And if we listen to them carefully, I think we'll be reminded that actually this is not the prayer of peace. This is a prayer about carrying one's cross, especially the last part of the prayer, which I will leave with you. St. Francis prays, O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled, but to console, to be understood as to understand, for it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Take up your cross. God bless you.